listening to Reckless Creatives, a Pipeline Artists original podcast, where Sadie Dean and Jeanne Bowerman share the candid truth about the challenges and benefits of living life as artists.
Every time, Sadie Dean, when we come on the camera and I see your rug, I think those are blood stains on the floor.
That's a first.
Right?
And I will neither confirm nor deny.
Well, that's what I would expect of you. Anyway, and I've seen your short film, so it might be, right?
You're right.
So we are recklessly talking to Jenna Avery today, and Jenna, Sadie, and I go back many years. I don't even know how many years, because we're only 25.
Correct.
That is all true.
All true.
All true.
And all true. So really excited, Jenna, to talk to you. I know you do a lot of sci-fi stuff, which is so out of my realm. And also coaching and writing for Script Magazine and Final Draft and all of those things. So we're really excited to have you here today.
I'm excited to be here. It's a treat to get to hang out with both of my editors.
Past and present.
Exactly.
That's right. That's right. I do have to say, though, Jenna is also a writer herself and has some things kind of moving forward. The last time we spoke, I mean, it's Hollywood, but crossing all the fingers and all the things that things are just moving along for you, pitching and all that.
Yeah. He was talking about with the sci-fi. That's what I do with my writing is all sci-fi all the time.
Do you find that genre is a little tougher because it's so expensive to make?
You know, the cool thing about sci-fi is that it's a reality genre, and so it can mash up with pretty much anything. So you know, there's lots and lots of low budget sci-fi things that are makeable for a much lower budget than, say, the really big crash bang adventure sci-fi. Action adventure sci-fi is a really different thing than like a sci-fi romance, for example, or like I think I wrote an article for Script a long time ago about different kind of lower budget, affordable sci-fi projects. And one of them that I wrote about was called Safety Not Guaranteed, which is fantastic. It has Aubrey Plaza in it, I think in one of her earlier roles. And it's fantastic. And it's very low budget. Like it's really just about these people trying to figure out if this guy really has a time travel machine or not. And then at the very end, you find out if he has it or not. That's it. So there's not a lot of, high budget stuff to it. So it really can run the gamut.
For book pipeline, we have an unpublished contest, and there's a sci-fi category, and I'm always like, okay, somebody read that first. I'll come in later. And people say the same of me, like as writing historical fiction, like they can't wrap their brain around how much research and all that world building. And it's all world building. Like you're, building this world that I can't even imagine. And have you always wanted to write sci-fi, or did you ever write other genres?
I mean, I started being interested in sci-fi when I was a kid, and my dad handed me a book. I was like, I think you might like this. And it was The City and the Stars by Arthur C. Clarke. And I was just instantly in love with that genre. And I think Star Wars came out not too long after that for me, or maybe right around the same time. And so it was just like a kind of a love affair from there. I didn't think that I would be good enough to write sci-fi myself. So I always sort of fantasized around other areas. Like I have a thing from 6th grade where I wrote like a future autobiography of myself, and it included being a writer. And actually was focused on being a writer. And the story title that I had in the bio was The Magic Dollhouse. So clearly I was thinking more along the fantasy realm rather than the sci-fi realm, but still in that fantastical department,
Sadie, I wonder what our 6th grade biography.
I was just thinking that too. Like that's so cool.
Yeah, I have it in a book. It's really neat. Like my teacher had us make those. So we had to illustrate it and make a whole thing. It was really fun.
And I'm glad that your mother didn't throw it out.
Yeah, it's fun to have now.
And when you were talking about your dad buying you this book, and the first book my dad bought me when I was like, I don't know, middle school, maybe. he's like, oh, he wanted to get me into reading. And we're at the little, convenient place after church. And they had this rack of books and they were like romance books, whatever. So he picks up this book and gives it to me. You should read this. This sounds good, about a first love, blah, blah, blah. It was that book Forever by Judy Blume, which is like a soft porn book. And then I read it and I was like, what? And then I didn't tell him what the book was like, but then I would tell my friends, oh my gosh, you have to read this book. So my book like ended up going all around my school.
That's hilarious.
Oh,
Unsuspecting.
Judy's tricky. You never know.
I know.
I was gonna say, when it comes to, sci-fi, the sci-fi world and all that, I feel like there's so many, I don't know, just like a lot of subtext that you could add in there just about society and stuff. It's like the same thing with horror where it's like it's so masterful in that if done right. But yeah, I mean, same for me. I tried writing sci-fi and I was like, I don't think this is for me, but I love reading it because it's so out of this world where you're just like, okay, this is what you can do. And
what's so special about it, I think, is that it lets people take a step back and look at our culture, our society, our structures, and comment on them in ways that we can't do as close. I mean, we try, but it gives some distance and perspective that you don't otherwise get. And that's part of what's so special about it and magical about it for me.
Can you talk about what you're working on right now, or is that still like under wraps until you can say what it is?
Yeah, I can say something about it sort of generally. So the thing that I'm pitching right now is kind of a sci-fi drama with a little action adventure to it. It's a kind of a lower budget, family-oriented thing with a 16-year-old protagonist whom I love. And then the one I'm developing now is a sci-fi romance. So it's almost like a sci-fi Outlander. So we'll see. Yeah,
that's exciting.
So, as a TV series or feature?
I think a feature. I've been working with it with my mentor a little bit, and we looked at it both ways and thought it would work better as a feature than as a series. But I actually think it could go either way. It just depends on how you approach it. And he was saying like you could have both, like, write both of them, and then you've got options. So
yeah. Totally. So you mentioned mentor.
Yeah.
And everybody always will ask on Script Chat or whatever, how do you get a screenwriting mentor? How did you get your mentor?
Well, I mean, I'm paying him. I mean, he's a coach. I mean, just like for other writers, it's not somebody that I'm, been apprenticed to, so to speak. But I just considered him like a mentor because I can look up to him, ask him questions, bounce stuff off him, that kind of thing. Yeah. So another way to say it would be a story coach, which is also work that I do. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people get prickly when they think about, paying somebody to help them and to advise them. And but I would like to just put this out there.
Yeah.
It's sort of like how I always equate it to is like when I paid somebody to tutor my children in physics. Like, sometimes there's just something that's okay to do. You're paying somebody for professional advice for their time. It's a lot harder to get somebody to help you do that stuff for free. And we could have a whole other session, which Sadie, we should have one all about how to get a screenwriting mentor that you don't pay for, and how to get people to champion you, because I have a lot of thoughts on that.
But many thoughts.
Many thoughts. But I also do have a very big thought that it is okay to pay people. Like, people talk about like story coaches and story consultants, like, oh, why would you? That's such a ripoff and blah, blah, blah. It's not. It's an investment in your career. And if some people learn better by having the advice of somebody else and having a dialogue and discussion than they learn from reading a book or reading scripts or, just writing. Some people really learn better that way and like that one-on-one engagement. And there's no dark cloud over that, in my opinion. I think it's extremely valid. I have done it and I have never regretted it.
It's an interesting question that people raise about like whether or not it's okay to do that. And I guess from myself personally, I really value being able to hire someone and pay them for their time and their knowledge and expertise, and have the ability to run things by people that I have more professional experience than I do and can give me feedback. And, I certainly I have peers that I run things by as well, but I like the combo. So
yeah.
For you, because you're also a writing coach, and I think that is really cool that you also have your someone else that you're seeking advice from.
Yeah,
I'm sure that informs you a lot too as a writing coach. But just starting out as a writing coach, when you're finding your footing there and realizing that you could help other writers, and time is our most valuable asset. So like finding that price point of like, this is what I'm worth and this is what my time is worth, while helping someone. And you're not greedy. You're not a greedy person, Jenna. So it's like, how do you put out that like level playing field for everyone?
That's a good question. And, I think one of the things that I've tried to do over the course of the many years that I've been coaching has been to offer things at different price points, which, like, for example, I run an online community for writers where we have writing sprints, we have monthly Zooms where we check in with each other about our goals and our progress and share resources and things. We have weekly check-ins where we post on our site about our goals and plans for the week ahead. So lots of those kinds of support structures. And that's at a much lower price point than working with me one-on-one, which is still not hugely expensive, but it's graded, so to speak, so that people have options that work for them and work for their budget. And then I also try to offer some shorter sessions and some longer length sessions so that, again, like, people can pick what works for their budgets too. So I just try to have a range of things while also balancing and managing my energy and time, because especially as an introverted HSP, I need a fair amount of time to just be and get myself into the right headspace for my own writing. And so I have to have it work out for everybody.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people need that accountability, and somehow I've always felt if it's something I'm paying for.
Skin in the game is what
it's skin in the game. Yeah. And it's like, okay. And also the deadlines, I've been doing this thing for the last couple of weeks, trying to organize my life. And I have thought about you so many times during this process, Jenna, and you don't even realize.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Right? Yeah. Because Jenna and I have never had a conversation about organizing. I've not used her as a coach, but she was right when I was at Script. She was writing a regular column there, and this one article that she wrote, and we'll put it in the show notes, was about how valuable it was just to write for 15 minutes. And so in this organizational program that I'm doing, like trying to, because we've mentioned many times on this podcast, My Crazy Life, they talk about doing things in 10-minute bursts. And one of the examples they even said was, like, say your goal is to write a novel. And I'm like, what? Like, I thought I was just organizing my files and this person's talking my language. And they're like, just say for 10 minutes, I'm going to do this, like block out the time. And sometimes it'll keep going after that. But if you do things in 10-minute bursts, just because the hardest part is starting. So if you schedule that time and you just start. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting was he used to be a literary agent, Nathan Bransford, and he has a great website, great blog, fantastic. And the other day I subscribed to his emails. I got an email and it talked about extreme calendaring. And it might have been an old email that I came across in my inbox, because part of my organization was cleaning my inbox. And I was like, oh my God, this kind of reminds me of what Jenna was saying, like, put it in your calendar, and so those little things, I feel like just those little nuggets, like sometimes it's just one thing that can change your whole perspective and all of a sudden make your day more productive and make your writing projects more productive. Like, what do you think, Jenna, is the thing that helps you be really productive on top of your consulting business and all that in your own writing?
It's an interesting question, because as time has gone on and I've had a second kid probably since I wrote that article, things have changed for me somewhat. I also had kind of a a real sense of burnout after some of the COVID stuff that we went through. And I was really trying to lean into my business and keep it alive during all of that.
Yeah.
And I had some difficult creative feedback at one point too. And I was really kind of reeling from both of those things together, and took some time off and found that I write differently now than I used to. So I don't try to write in little 15-minute bursts anymore. And instead I focus mostly on what I was talking about a second ago, which you could call it headspace, or my emotional and mental state. Like, I just feel like getting into the right state is super important for me now in a way that it didn't used to be. And I don't totally understand all of that. Like, is it age? Is it where I am in my life? Is it, the things I mentioned? But I'm here now, and what's working best for me is to have a lot of open space on my calendar. Like, extreme calendaring would never work for me now. Like, I have to see white space to feel like, okay, I can relax, I can focus, I can dig into this, I can spend time with it. And then the other thing that happened too that was fascinating is that with that sci-fi drama that I was talking about earlier, I had a whole different direction that I was going with that story. It was going to be an invasion story set in this place that I've spent a lot of summers in my lifetime with my family. And I started, when I was feeling so kind of burned out, I started doing this writing with my character. So I was writing longhand in my giant notebook here, writing longhand, like asking her questions about the story and what did she think and stuff. And she came up with this fantastic idea that took the story in a totally different direction. She, in air quotes, right? Because ultimately, I mean, of course it's me, but I don't care where it came from. I don't care how it worked, but like the fact that I was able to tap into that was so valuable. And I feel like, I believe that came out of that spaciousness that I'm needing and wanting right now. And so I feel very attached to it as a result. So I don't know that I answered your question, Jeannie, but I think it's so interesting to recognize and understand that things that worked for us in the past may not work for us any longer. And a writing practice is always something that's evolving and changing, especially if we have kids in our lives that, maybe we have younger kids, maybe we have older kids, maybe they're off at college, and, things migrate around and change in ways that really affect our practice. And it doesn't have to, but it can. And so sometimes we have to adjust and roll with it and try new strategies and new tools.
It's so critical to be flexible. And Sadie and I talk about this all the time. We probably should have called the podcast this.
Flexible creatives.
Pivoting. Like, having to pivot. Like, you're always having to pivot. Like, okay, so let's talk about another time when pivoting is very important, when you're pitching.
Yeah.
Like, you'll be pitching them, you feel like you're losing them, and then, or you realize they really are leaning into female characters more than male characters. And all of a sudden you're like, you know what, I'm going to pitch this and I'm going to make it this guy a woman, like in the middle of the pitch. And sometimes you just got to do it. Like, you got to read the room and pivot. I love pitching. So, like, what are the things about pitching that you like and that like stress the hell out of you?
Just to take a step back from that, as an introverted writer, pitching is definitely less appealing to me than other things might be. And what I've learned recently is that one of the things that's really challenging for a lot of writers is this fear of being seen. And so even though we do want our work to be seen, and that's ultimately the goal, there is a sort of a built-in resistance for some of us around it. And so I think pitching can trigger a lot of that kind of energy coming up or resistance coming up. The thing that I like about pitching is finding ways to do it that work for me. And so, like, I'm happier doing email querying or using, an online place that I can pitch, or, things like that kind of work better for me. But at the same time, I do like talking to people. And I have been good in a room, in interviews in prior careers and things. And so I think, like, it's about, for me, making a connection with the real person as opposed to like thinking of it as some kind of formal stress test. Does that make sense? Something that's grounded and personal and connecting is the way that I like to frame it in my mind.
I'm curious for you, Jenna. because you've been coaching for quite some time and writing for script and final draft and doing your own writing. But when it comes to your writing as a coach, has there ever been like a big aha moment for you, like working with a client or something, or just like, okay, like this totally changes my frame of mind of how I, converse with you, or how like I attack what I'm working on, or like just strategies moving forward for other writers. I don't know. I'm just curious, like, because I feel like you said, the practice is ever evolving. I would assume that goes for, how you're, working with your clients as well.
Because I've been doing it for so long, the big thing that I've seen is essentially what I was saying before, which is that things change and then we change and adapt as needed. And like some of the stuff that I would say in the past, I still think is useful. Like the idea of I'm just going to write for 15 minutes and like that's going to be enough. I'm going to declare myself satisfied with that. That is a useful tool for someone who's been stuck for a long time. And I will still use that tool sometimes, right? There's so many different ways to do it. But I think that's the thing that's really shifted for me is realizing and more fully understanding how many different ways there are to write. And that it really is about, for each of us, finding the process that works for us as individuals rather than some prescriptive, like you have to do it this way, or you have to outline this way, you have to structure that way, or whatever. Like the thing that I did with this last script was I wrote the most detailed outline I've ever written in my entire life. And it was 22 pages. The screenplay is 104, so it's like a pretty significant chunk. But I really told myself the entire story, including dialogue and emotion and action beats and everything in this super detailed outline. And then when it came time to write it, it was super fast. And I've never had that experience before. So, again, like always learning, always trying new things, always being willing to see what works best for me right now.
I've got this huge whiteboard that I found when I was writing screenplays. That was really, really helpful. I would break the story on the whiteboard. And Sadie and I have talked about my whiteboard, and people covet my whiteboard. It's this fabulous whiteboard. But now that I'm writing this book, I started doing some stuff on the whiteboard, but the book is so much bigger than a script. It's huge. And so I'm like, this just isn't going to cut it. Like I can't. And so now I have a journal that I have the outline in that I'm working on the different scenes. And I'm like, you know what, if I have to move the scenes around, I'm just going to rip the page out and stick it somewhere else. Like, it's not like, who cares? Like I started with index cards. And then I organized all the index cards. And then in the way I think I wanted, and then I started putting them in the journal so that now I have a full page and everything is all handwritten. So I can go a little more detail. And then I will take all that and put it into like a Word doc or something, or not even put it into Word doc, just use it, just refer to it. Okay, I'm ready to write the next chapter. And it's a completely different process. And
the process at the end is the process that worked,
Yeah.
You reminded me, Jeannie, that when we were talking about world building and science fiction and historical fiction, they are so similar. And what's fascinating to me is that historical fiction is one of my also favorite genres. If you're going to catch me watching something, I'm watching either sci-fi or like Downton Abbey or something. And I think it is because of those other worlds that we get to do. Regardless of, the specifics of whether it's sci-fi or historical, it's still another world. And I think that's what's so fun about it.
Okay, when you were talking about pitching before, and you were talking about people having this fear of putting their stuff out there, gosh, was it just yesterday? This week is 20 weeks long. Monday, Kira and I, my colleague at Book Pipeline, we were doing a little webinar for Coverfly on adapting a script into a novel. One of the attendees asked a question about the fear of self-publishing because she's a screenwriter, so she's used to writing a script, sitting on her laptop, never getting pitching it and having people read it, but no, it's going to go through this huge process before it ever gets made, if it ever gets made. But now she's writing a book and she's like, but once I self-publish and I put it out there, it's out there. Like, what can I take it down? Can I edit it? Can I put it? Like, it was that fear. Have you ever wanted to write a novel and adapt one of your scripts into a novel?
Yeah, 100%. It's definitely, it's on the list of things to do. And in fact, I've been thinking like, should I be adapting that script before I work on the next one? So it's definitely on my mind. I I would love to have novella versions of my screenplays. I feel like that's the right length for a screenplay. And I think it's pretty doable. I originally wanted to be an author, not a screenwriter. It just sort of ended up this way. And I love screenwriting so much. I love the media, the format, everything. Like, it's just so sweet. But I definitely want to do the adaptations of them as well, just because I feel like there's so many reasons, but one of them is I want my stories to be intact in some form in the world. And I really like the idea that I can write them the way I want them. And even if I sell the screenplays and they change them and they do whatever to them, my version still exists out in the world in the way that I want it to be in the world. So that's a big one for me. And then also there's the other side of it too, of like, was it John August who talked about this? I can't remember who it was. No, it's somebody else. I've got the wrong person, I think. But he was talking about, sometimes screenplays they just don't go anywhere. They end up sitting on a shelf. And then it's not in the world at all. That's frustrating too, I think, for those of us who are screenwriters. And so the idea of being able to still be able to find a way to share the story feels important and valuable too, that it doesn't just go nowhere.
No, I hope you do write your novellas, because I mean, we both know we've interviewed so many writers who have done adaptations, and it's always like, the audience is the worst when it comes to like, you ruin the book and there's nothing, it's like not the same. And it's like, yeah, well, the book can exist by itself. And the authors are usually fine with the adaptations because they're like, yeah, that's your version, but mine still exists. And that's completely fair and right. And yeah, but I hope you get to do yours and have that exist.
I was just going to say, sometimes I think it's so interesting when you see an adaptation from a book to a screenplay and they make it better.
Yeah,
that happens too.
It does.
There's so many interesting ways things go.
Back to the writing coach stuff. For those who are looking for maybe hiring a writing coach or finding that mentor mate, either it being exchanging money or not, just like setting expectations. Like what are you seeing from writers that are like coming to you, like that are like, you're like, hey, like that's not what we're doing here. Lower your expectations for some like a reality check. Because I assume that a lot of writers come in it thinking that they're going to be like the golden child and you're going to say they're great and get your script out today. And, and it's like, that's not going to happen, or that you're going to write it for them or something like that. I don't know, like just, some advice for those who are on the search.
I have had people approach me thinking that I would write their screenplay for them, that they just would come up with a really cool idea and then I would just somehow magically implement it for them. And that is definitely not what I do. It's more of a no than a changing of expectations, because like I'm not doing that. I've written on assignment before, but I was paid to do that for a director and producer. Like that was a whole different thing rather than just another writer coming to me. So that just feels like a kind of a boundary. I also think it depends on the kind of coaching people are looking for, and there's a real range. And I work with people primarily in two areas. One is like real story coaching. Like I sometimes work with people who are working on developing a book or a memoir or a screenplay, and they're stuck in a specific place in the story and they're not seeing how to get past it. And so me as the sounding board, we're brainstorming, we're coming up with ideas, we're thinking about sort of the logic of the story and how it should or could fit together and coming up with options. So there's all of that, which is super fun. And then I also do kind of both and for people, more of what I would call like writer's life coaching, where like we deal with the procrastination, the perfectionism, the inner doubt, the inner critic, the imposter syndrome, the avoidance, resistance, there's so much of that stuff. And then there's the practical side of like, okay, can we design a writing schedule that works for you, or create a writing practice that works for you? And how do we deal with your specific circumstances to come up with something that actually works as opposed to like theoretically works? Because like there's all kinds of people out there who will say like, you need to do this, 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 and this. And again, like I said before, I don't think it works that way. I think it's very specific and individual. And so, my goal as a coach is to help people find what works for them in a sustainable way. I'm not interested in burning people out or having people push really hard and exhaust themselves and then they can't write anymore for months. Like that's not interesting to me. I'm much more focused on the wholeness of the writer and their longer term success and fulfillment and satisfaction. I guess it's another piece too, like sometimes we're managing expectations around success and fears of success and fears of failure, fears of exposure and being seen, like we were talking about earlier too. So that, there's a wide range of things. I don't so much work on like the marketing and business side of it, although I certainly can. I've been helping people rewrite query letters lately, which has been actually really fun. So, that's interesting too. There's just a whole range of things that I work on with people. Did that answer your question, Sadie?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And then some.
Okay, good. Like I said, it's a big one.
It is. Yeah. It's hard to distill that. But yeah, I do like that you're not, saying like you have to do it this way or you can't do it at all. It's that you're working with people on their terms of like, you only have Monday evenings available. How do we, make the best of it for you rather than like, well, you're going to have to like give up something and write every day and suffer because then it makes it feel miserable. You don't look forward to it.
Right.
When we talk about routine, like I actually found myself when I released myself of having to write every day, like I wrote a practice novel. How I wrote it was just working on the weekends, writing on the weekends. I didn't even try to write during the week because I was too busy with work. And then once I gave myself permission to not feel guilty about, because everyone says you've got to write every day. You're not really a writer unless you write every day. Well, piss off. Sometimes that just doesn't work. That worked for that. But like now people's lives change and people have different responsibilities. Like you were saying, like you had a second kid or whatever. And then all of a sudden later, it's like, well, I don't even have the weekend to like do this anymore.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I find one of the things that I struggle with is like, I'll figure something out and be like, oh my God, I'll say to Sadie, oh my God, Sadie, I was so productive. Look what I did. Blah, blah, blah. And then it's almost like my mind goes, oh, you figured it out. You figured out how to get work done. It's like, okay, well, then now you can get work done. And then I go back to doing all my other stuff. It's like, well, wait a minute. I should still be getting work done. That's crazy. So like when you're counseling your clients, sometimes are you saying stuff to them and you're thinking, I'm telling them exactly what I need to do, but I'm not doing it myself. And like, but it's like, do you ever like feel like, oh boy, maybe I should hire myself?
Well, and this is why I have a coach or mentor also. You just know that you need someone to lean on yourself. So yeah, and I do find myself recognizing things in what I'm saying to other people. That's like, oh yeah, I could use a little bit of that too. And that's one of the things that I like about the way that I have my writing community structured and the way that I structure my coaching practices. I'm not trying to pretend to be the be all end all expert, but more like a writer who's along on the journey too, and like sharing my challenges and successes and struggles as well, so that people don't feel like they're wrong or bad or different, or that I'm wrong or bad or different. It's like that. It's writing can be quite hard for all of us. And even people who are extremely successful or, like, for example, one of my favorite writers is Stephen Pressfield, and he writes about his book is The War of Art, and writes about dealing with resistance. And he still struggles with resistance at 60, whatever, 70, whatever years old that he is. And he talks about it all the time in his blog posts. It's like, it just is hard. It just triggers stuff. And if we're not triggering stuff, we might not be doing it right. So if the fear and doubt and resistance is coming up, that's probably a good sign that we're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And then we just
sucky as it is.
Yeah, exactly. And then we have to figure out how to manage it and ourselves around it so that it doesn't stop us. And one of the things that you said, Jeannie, that I thought was interesting is that it's almost self-sabotage. Like we figure out, like, here's the thing that works, whether it's like diet or exercise or writing or anything that requires that kind of executive function energy to make happen. It's easy to then trick ourselves into like, okay, well, now I got it now. I don't have to do it anymore. But wait, I meant to. So it's like a funny little trick that we play on ourselves. And I think, like, going back even a little further to the idea of like, do you have to write every day? I don't think so. I used to say that, and I will still say that it could be a useful tool. If you haven't been writing for a long time and you're feeling blocked or stuck, that it can be really helpful to write anything, like journaling or whatever, morning pages, whatever, to write anything with some level of frequency, because it helps kind of reactivate the writing muscle. But at the same time, I think the real test is, are you writing? And are you writing in a way that feels good to you and feels like you're moving forward? And if you're, if that's writing on the weekends and that's what's doing the trick for you, that's great. And if that was working and it's not working anymore, like, well, what could we do instead? So,
yeah, you touched on, the idea of if you haven't been writing for a while and that routine of writing every day, it actually does help a lot. I did that for about a month or two and I was like, okay, this is because it was like one of those things like, do I even want to do this anymore? Do I like this? And then you find out like, oh, this is actually nice. And there is a reason why I've been studying this for so long and like, okay, like I can do this. And then of course life happens and you're like, well, I don't have that time anymore. But it does help you kind of like clean out those cobwebs and give you like a refresh of why you started in the first place, and then hopefully try to keep the momentum. But again, like reality check sometimes comes into play.
definitely.
Jenna, if there's like one piece of advice you could give writers out there that either comes from a place of yourself as a writer, as a creative, plus yourself as, and if they have to be two separate pieces of advice, that's okay. And then from the perspective of like a writing coach, like what do you think the thing is that has moved the dial the most for them?
I think that the main thing that stands out to me is the self-management piece. And that's maybe not the best terminology, but just like understanding ourselves, being patient with ourselves, thinking about the way that we talk to ourselves and if we're kind or not. Lots of writers were our own worst critics. We would never say the things that we say to ourselves to each other, and if we did, we probably shouldn't. So
we wouldn't be friends anymore.
Right. Again, self-management is maybe not the best term, but it's like, how are we taking care of ourselves around writing? What are we telling ourselves about writing? How are we approaching it? And like I said before, the biggest thing for me right now is my own state and like how I'm taking care of myself to be in the right state to write. And by write, I mean being aligned with the energy of the story that I'm telling. For example, sometimes I'm listening to music to put myself into the place that I want to be, or I'm watching something that puts me in that place that like is simpatico energy with the story, if that makes sense to you.
Especially when it comes to like songwriting, I found that watching documentaries and just like holding my guitar, all of a sudden I'll come out of watching the documentary having written something because I was so influenced by what they're talking about, or just like, there's so much going on in the world. And it's just like, you're like, okay, like what else can I pull from? You just never know. Like, and you don't have to actually pen to paper or, fingers to keyboard to be writing per se. Yeah. It could be walking, taking a shower, whatever it is, as long as you're thinking about it, you're like halfway there. Almost.
Yeah, story immersion for me is another key. It's like, and immersion can mean so many different things, but just like having it in my mind when I'm washing the dishes or going for a walk or taking a shower is sometimes way more productive than forcing myself to sit down at my keyboard. It just depends, And then at the same time, like I'm like, well, there is a point where we do need to actually put our fingers on the keyboards. So there's that side of it too, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Like I think the thing for me right now, I'm listening to like this 25-hour podcast of the French Revolution, and I'm listening while I'm walking my dog. And then all of a sudden she'll say something about that world, that time period, whatever. And I'll be like, oh my God, I'm going to have a character do that. And then I like put a note on my phone, or I put like while I'm walking. And the other thing too, I think that helps people is sometimes, like you were talking about, that kind of stream of consciousness with your character where you're talking to her, even just like stream of consciousness writing. Like if you're starting projects is the hardest thing for me because I know how much it's going to be forever before it's done. And even longer because I'm not starting, like, you know what I mean? Just, and
yes.
So that's just sitting down that stream of consciousness, almost like dusting off the cobwebs, just getting some sort of flow going. The other thing I do too is like the beginning, like a beginning of a screenplay, beginning of even an article I'm writing. Sometimes I'll just skip the beginning and I'll just start writing later, and I'll start saying like, here's a little outline of kind of what I want to say. And then I'll just start writing, and I'll worry about writing the beginning at the end. Like afterwards, I'll circle back. Same thing with like that first scene and in a novel, they even talk about how important the first sentence is. Like it's like, oh my God, that's so overwhelming. That's so intimidating. I'm going to trust that when I've got the story all out, I'll know what that first sentence is supposed to be. And so I'm just going to leave that first paragraph blank and just go ahead. And I think, anything you can do to just kind of vomit it out.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about our conversation a couple of days ago and thinking about what I would say, and I just remembered the thing that popped back into my head, which is the self-management. The other term for it is like Jedi mind tricks. That like we're kind of tricking ourselves to the page, if it were. Because sometimes we do have to like find a way, and if we're skipping the first paragraph or the first sentence or right in the beginning after we write the ending, or it all works.
It all works. Well, another fun thing to put out there. Jenna writes one of our most popular columns for Scripts called Ask the Coach, and she gives great practical, like perfect in the moment. Every time I get her articles, I'm like, oh my God, this speaks to me like right now. How did you do this? I needed to hear this. Articles for writers at any stage in their career, and covers everything that we've been talking about, from just attacking the page to being mindful to yourself and setting those realistic expectations and everything. And the cool thing, it's all free. And all you have to do is just submit a question. We'll put the links in our page here of how you can submit. But yeah, if anyone has questions about just writing in life in general, you never know, that will probably resonate with a lot of other people who are too afraid to put it out there. But it's always so useful and so helpful. And I apply it to everything I do. Every time she puts an article, I'm like, yep, this is going to my next thing. This is how I will approach this now. Thank you, Jenna. every time.
I might have to submit a question.
Oh, that would be great, Jeannie. I would love that. What's so fun is that the questions are so inspiring to answer. Like it triggers like a cascade of ideas and solutions and possibilities. And I never like to be too prescriptive. I never like to say you have to do this thing, just like I don't with my clients. But it's more like, okay, here are some things to think about. Here's some things to try on and see if they work for you. Here's some perspective for what you're trying to do. And it's so fun. They're great to answer. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jenna.
You are so welcome.
I'm sure you've helped a lot of people today, starting with us.
Yeah.
And Lord knows we need help.
Yes.
Reckless Creatives is a Pipeline Artist original podcast. Like, subscribe, and follow us on social media at Pipeline Artists. And find more info at pipelineartists.com/listen. Until next time, stay reckless.